In the heart of Brazil, in the state of São Paulo, there is a small town called Paraibuna, a quiet place embraced by the waters of the river that gives it its name. For an American audience, it might be hard to imagine the vastness and isolation of certain parts of the Brazilian countryside in 1954. It was a world apart, where life followed the rhythm of nature. And it was in this unlikely setting, during a fishing afternoon, that a 35-year-old metalworker named Antônio Rossi became the protagonist of one of the most detailed and baffling alien contact stories ever recorded. His experience wasn't a fleeting sighting of lights in the sky. It was an invitation, a journey, a complete immersion into another civilization. The story he told, and repeated flawlessly for over 50 years, is a human document of inestimable value. It forces us to question the border between the real and the impossible. Today, we'll cross the Atlantic and go back in time to unravel what happened to Antônio Rossi on the banks of a Brazilian river.
The gentle afternoon was fading over the Paraíba Valley. The sun was losing its strength, painting the sky in hues of orange and violet. While his friends set up camp for the night's vigil, Antonio wandered off, walking along the bank, his keen eyes searching for the perfect spot, that corner where the river seemed most promising. Solitude was his companion, the sound of his footsteps muffled by the vegetation. It was in this silence that the impossible manifested. About 100 feet away, two figures materialized in his vision. They didn't resemble any local wildlife. The first instinct, a primal chill, was fear. His body tensed, his mind searching its repository for anything to explain what he was seeing. They were humanoid forms, tall, nearly 7 feet in height, but their resemblance to humans ended there. Their skin was smooth, without hair, and though they wore no clothes, they had no trace of sexual organs. Their muscles were defined, not in an exaggerated way, but like those of an athlete. Their hands and feet were the most disconcerting detail. They had only 2 long, agile digits. Panic screamed for him to run, to return to the safety of the camp and forget this vision. But something stopped him. One of the beings moved its thick lips in a gesture Antonio interpreted as a smile. There was no threat, only a disconcerting calm. And then he stopped fighting the fear and just observed. Their eyes, large and almond-shaped, dominated their oval faces. The pupils, an intense yellow, seemed to hold an ancient wisdom. They had no eyebrows. The nose was tiny and flat, the ears small and pressed against a head slightly larger than our own. There was an expression of deep serenity on their faces. Moved by a courage he didn't know he possessed, Antonio broke the silence of the woods. "What do you want?" he asked aloud. The words hung in the air, without an audible reply. The beings did not move their mouths. Instead, the closer creature slowly raised an arm and pointed to its own eyes. And in that instant, Antônio Rossi's world changed forever.
It wasn't a sound that entered his ears. It was a thought,
a clear and distinct voice that blossomed inside his own mind, like a memory that wasn't his. "We come in peace. We are inhabitants of another planet." The sensation was dizzying. It was like thinking with someone else's mind. The voice continued, calm and resonant. "Have faith in us. We have come to invite you to visit our world. We are not demanding, only inviting. If you accept, it must be of your own free will. Within a few hours, we will arrive there." The promise was clear. They would bring him back, unharmed, and he would be free to report everything he saw. For a few seconds, logic fought against what he felt. It was madness, it was impossible, but these creatures emanated an inexplicable confidence, an aura of peace that disarmed any suspicion. It wasn't hypnosis, it was something deeper, a certainty that bloomed in his chest. And against all reason, he accepted. The beings then guided him. There, just a few yards away, floating about 1.5 feet off the ground without making a sound, was the machine. A pale gray disc about 100 feet in diameter and 30 feet high, crowned by a central dome. It was a vision of power and silence. A door opened in the fuselage, sliding smoothly, and a ramp descended. Antônio Rossi, the metalworker, the fisherman, took the first step into the unknown. The interior of the craft was as impressive as its exterior. A circular room about 26 feet in diameter, with smooth walls and a domed ceiling. Everything was bathed in an intense but diffuse light that cast no shadows and had no apparent source. There were no bulbs, no wiring, no outlets. It seemed as if every piece, from the floor to the walls, had been carved from a single block of material. In the center, a circular table surrounded by small stools fixed to the floor. On one of the walls, a 10-foot-long panel with buttons, levers, and, in the center, a large oval screen. Other beings, identical to those who had met him, moved with purpose and silence. One of them approached and handed him a cup containing a thick golden liquid similar to honey. The voice in his mind explained that it was a preparation for the long journey. Fear returned for a moment. Was it poison? But the next thought was one of resignation and trust. If they wanted to kill him, they would have done so already. He drank. The taste was neutral, the sensation indescribable. The door closed without a trace, making the wall a single, continuous surface. The departure was impossibly smooth. There was no jolt, no engine noise, no sensation of acceleration. He only knew they were moving when he looked at the oval screen. On it, an image of Earth appeared, a blue and white ball spinning in the black velvet of space. With astonishing clarity, he saw the luminous patch of the city of São Paulo, a testament that he was leaving everything he knew. The journey, enveloped by the exchange of thoughts with his hosts, was no longer an experience of fear, but of wonder. When the ship finally began its approach, Antonio saw the planet of his hosts through the window. From space, he observed an oval-shaped city that shimmered as if made entirely of glass or crystal. The landing was as smooth as the takeoff. Upon disembarking, a committee awaited them. They were beings like the others, but here he noticed subtle differences. Some with features that seemed more feminine to him, and others smaller, like children, who waved and smiled, approaching to touch him with curiosity. The silence was the first thing one noticed.
There was no sound of traffic or loud voices. The streets, if they could even be called that, were like glass tubes. The houses were round, transparent, equidistant from each other, and surrounded by gardens of vibrant, unknown flowers. Strangely, they had no windows, as the structure itself was translucent. Through the tube streets, cylindrical vehicles glided, fast and silent, without wheels and without drivers, like a fully automated public transport system. To cross from one side to the other, the inhabitants used small floating platforms. The city's illumination, just like on the ship, came from everywhere and nowhere. He would later learn that jets of gases called futures were released at a high altitude, igniting and creating a vault of cool, uniform light that bathed the entire city and penetrated the transparent homes. It was a world of harmony, light, and silence.
Antonio was led to a being who introduced himself mentally as Zas-Lhe, the equivalent of a doctor. It was through him that the fisherman began to understand the complexity of that civilization. There, private property did not exist. The vehicles, called voladores, were all collective. Some, like the one that brought him, were space voladores, capable of reaching speeds our physics considers impossible, crossing space to visit other planets. In that world, there was no money. Everyone had what they needed, living in a system where services were free and the collective well-being was the main goal. The diet was based exclusively on what we would call vegetables. Reproduction, one of the greatest mysteries to Antonio, occurred through the germinative kiss, a prolonged kiss that initiated gestation in an internal pouch in the female, with birth occurring through a small incision. They had no lungs. Their respiration occurred through the skin, absorbing the necessary nutrients from the atmosphere. Spirituality also had its place. Large, rounded temples, without walls and with domed ceilings supported by columns, served as meeting places. There, through image projections, teachings about mutual well-being were shared. They did not believe in death as an end, but as a transition. For them, life is one, eternal, and beings travel through different planets and realities in continuous stages of evolution. Zas-Lhe also revealed that despite being pacifists, they possessed formidable defense technology. High-frequency light-ray emitters with the power to disintegrate a planet like Earth in a matter of minutes. But he was emphatic. They were weapons they would never use for destruction, only as a last resort for defense. It was Zas-Lhe who suggested that Antonio write about his visit, and promised that in the future he could visit other inhabited worlds with even more different beings.
The notion of time had dissolved for Antonio. He didn't know if hours or days had passed. The decision to return came from his hosts. He drank the viscous liquid again and boarded the Space Vol-Torre. The farewell was silent, but filled with an emotion that made him cry. The ship left him at the exact same spot on the riverbank where it had found him. When the ship departed, vanishing without a trace, the silence of the woods seemed deeper. He looked at his wristwatch. It was stopped.
It read 5:06 p.m., the approximate time he had been taken the previous day. But the sun in the sky was high. From its position, he estimated it must be around 10 a.m. He had been gone all night. Stunned, he walked until he found his companions. They were worried, relieved to see him. "Where did you spend the night?" they asked. The words to describe what he had experienced wouldn't come. How could he explain the unexplainable? He lied. He said he had found a good fishing spot further on and had spent the night there. The secret was too heavy. He kept it for 8 long days until the need to share became unbearable. As expected, the reaction was skepticism. Some said he had dreamed it, others that he was making it up for attention. But the story spread through the factory, and some, intrigued by the seriousness and consistency of his account, believed him. It was these people who encouraged him to follow Zas-Lhe's advice. Antônio Rossi wrote the book, A Flying Saucer, I Visited Another Planet, a detailed record of his journey. Years later, in 2007, now elderly and living humbly in Rio de Janeiro, he gave an interview. His story had not changed. Not a single detail was added or removed. It was the same precise and fantastic narrative he first told in 1954.
Antônio Rossi didn't bring back an alien artifact or a blurry photograph. The only evidence he presented to the world was himself. His intact memory, his consistent narrative, and the serene conviction of a transformed man. He became a living document. His story is not a case to be solved with technology, but an enigma to be deciphered with intuition and an open mind. What resonates more strongly with you? The crushing silence of the cosmos, or the persistent, lifelong whisper of a man who swore he came back from it? If you believe that these accounts, these human documents, are treasures that deserve to be investigated and preserved, the most powerful way to signal that in our digital universe is by leaving a like, and of course, making sure you are part of our community of explorers with notifications turned on. Every click is a vote of confidence that the echoes of the impossible must never fade away. Share your thoughts in the comments below.